Aviation is a game of give and take. As helicopter pilots, we create our lift by commanding the elements, and yet we often find ourselves at their mercy. Severe wind, storm clouds, bird strikes, all serve to remind us that we aren't alone in the high planes we navigate. But just as important to consider as the natural forces that fill the sky are the fellow aviators who brave these forces with us. And just like nature can disrupt our flight, so too can the power our machines generate disrupt theirs. Our guest today saw one way this disruption led to catastrophe. Ned Parks is a dual-rated flight instructor from Akron, Ohio. He spent the last year researching the effect of rotor downwash on fixed-wing aircraft in flight. What struck him early in his investigation was how the phenomena he witnessed wasn't being talked about in the industry. Ned is determined to change that. He'll tell us about the accident that set him off into this field of work, what he's gleaned from his research, and how the aviation world can move forward and spread awareness. How can we make the sky a safer place to coexist with all who come up to traverse it? This is Push to Talk with Bruce Webb, Episode 2. Man-made moving microbursts.
We've invited Ned Parks here today to talk about something that sparked our interest. It's something that I think we've not really discussed in the industry sufficiently well. Why don't you tell us about it?
So this all came to be, Bruce, on September 18th of 21. I was actually at a pilot's club at an airport, and we were having a clam bake. Just a fun Saturday with about 60 other pilots. And a landing S-76 aeromedical helicopter was coming back from a trip to their home base. And they were making a normal approach to the active runway. And there was a guy in an S-20 Rans, which is a home-built with a Corvair engine in it. And he was waiting to take off. And it asked the S-76 to sidestep the runway as soon as they could so he could take off. And they said, sure, we'll get out of the way as soon as we can. And they did. And they started to land at their base. And he rolled onto the active runway and took off and got into their downwash, which we're going to talk about that term in a minute. But anyway, the end result was, unfortunately, he flipped upside down and was killed in the ensuing crash. And as it turned out, the more we talked to NTSB and FAA and DPEs and other flight instructors across the spectrum, both rotorcraft and fixed wing, this was not a topic anybody's ever talked about. It's hardly been mentioned by anybody anywhere. And so I just said, you know what, we're gonna change that. The day after that accident, the NTSB was on site, FAA was on site, and we have that accident on video. It's under lockdown, as you can imagine, Bruce, but just out of respect for the family, and it's pretty brutal to watch, I have to tell you. But we were able to get it off the airport videos. And so there's really no doubt about what happened in the separation and so on and so forth. And what was fascinating is there was, people that had been in aviation and 20 plus years each. There's probably 150, 160 years of aviation experience standing around with I don't know how many tens of thousands of hours of flight time and varying areas of expertise and safety people and investigation people. And we're all standing there looking at each other, just literally shaking our heads going, I don't remember anybody ever talking about this.
Right.
And it was a watershed moment for probably 5 of us just standing there. I mean, NTSB investigators, everybody we're all just kind of shaking our heads going, we've just never spoke about this. And I started picking up the phone, within the next week, and I called up to the FSDO and my contacts there, and they went, what are you talking about? I called DPEs, and they went, well, yeah, I talk about wake turbulence on a check ride, but not from a helicopter. And it became very apparent very quickly that this was just not a topic that's been spoken about. So I want to make it clear that in no way, shape, or form are any of us criticizing anybody about not knowing. We just have not talked. It's just not been talked about as an industry, and we need to raise awareness.
Sure. We're aware as helicopter pilots that our wake is our responsibility.
Right.
Within some measure of reasonableness, of course.
Of course.
But, and I think that's mostly visible, not the wake, but the concept when we are taxiing in and out to FBOs or onto ramps. And I believe most of us are very cognizant that our downwash is disruptive to aircraft around us, or we may be blowing debris around, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know that many of us give much thought to the potential danger of that vortice or those vortices when we're flying, when we're on approach.
That's so correct, Bruce. You're absolutely right. So there's a couple of terms that my research has kind of uncovered, and I've then kind of made up my own out of this. So there is very scant writing on the topic, either at a hover or forward flight, anywhere in the ACs or the AIM. But what it does say is that at a hover, and I'll be very clear about this. So we're going to define hover as less than ETL.
Sure.
So at a hover, we understand that we create rotor downwash. We understand that it can reach some pretty serious speeds, although that's not mentioned in the official documentation. I did find a calculation, and I did find some other research that tells us how fast. And we know that it is written in the FAA documentation that 3 rotor disc separation we should keep from a hovering helicopter. We know that. And that's written and it's talked about. It's in the AIM and it's in an AC. As a helicopter community, we're acutely aware of the damage that we can do, and this is an important distinction, to things sitting stationary on the ground. And I want to make that distinction because, as you said, we've not thought about it in forward flight, really. And so there's signs up at heliports, and there's, you and I in EMS or anywhere will be told, do this, and we'll go, yeah, we're going to park over here. Or, in my online presentation that I do and my in-person presentation, I have a thing, a taxi up to the pumps will get you gas, and then I show a picture of a Mooney sitting right by the pumps. And that's just, we know that could possibly do damage to the parked aircraft, but the FBO kid doesn't, right? They don't know. Nobody's talked about it.
Right. And they're not PIC.
And they're not PIC. We are. So we are acutely aware, and I think that the helicopter community does a pretty good job of trying to minimize the damage we can do to things that are sitting on the ground. None of us have had a conversation about what happens when we're in forward flight away from the ground to other flying aircraft. And that's where this topic really
I think
comes
you're right.
together.
If you fly in formation with other helicopters, tight formation, for me, it's been largely doing air-to-air aerial photography. You become quickly aware that the vortices are there, the wake is there, and it can be pretty substantial when you're moving about the target aircraft. So
Right.
If you're in the camera ship and you're filming or taking stills of a target ship, the story ship, you never want to be behind and below that aircraft ahead. And especially, typically when we do aerial photography, it's best if you're flying an aircraft, if the camera ship should be more agile than the story ship if possible. So if you're flying a 120, a 350, a 355, something that's fairly small, and you're shooting aerials of a 92, a 225, something of that size, you do not want to get behind that aircraft and below the rotor. It will announce itself to you.
It will announce itself. And what's fascinating is, as those of us in the helicopter community know, we are able to withstand turbulent air much better than a fixed wing.
Yeah, we kind of chew through it.
We just kind of chew through it. We don't have these huge, stuffed, sticky plank wings out there that are immovable. Our rotors bend up and down. They move back and forth. They kind of aren't in it very long. So we, moderate turbulent PIREPs, we go, yeah, whatever. Right? It's yeah, we just and so for us, even in formation, it's a whole different animal. But for a fixed wing, it's a completely different experience.
Right. And in the event you're describing, the ship, and I can't recall if you identified the aircraft or not, but it was a 76.
It was a S-76.
So, a moderately sized helicopter, not huge, but not
10,000
small.
pounds at that is somewhere in that vicinity.
Right.
Yeah.
And so certainly something of respectable size.
Correct.
But, a 10,000-pound fixed-wing aircraft going off of a runway, I don't honestly know the requirements for ATC to give you a wake turbulence advisory, for a departing aircraft. You probably know.
I do now.
Perfect. Yeah, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
But I doubt that a 10,000-pound airplane is sufficiently heavy for ATC to give you that call.
Correct. They have 3 levels that they give, and they're significantly higher than that. What's really interesting is their requirement for a wake turbulence advisory on a helicopter is above, are you ready for this? 41,000 pounds.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know a ship that weighs 41,000, not in the civil world, that weighs 41,000 pounds.
In the civil world, no. I mean, your 53s do, your Chinooks do, your other really, really heavy lift do, but everything else is below that significantly. I mean, Blackhawks are 25,000.
Right. Yeah. I mean, 225 is 25. Yeah. 92's in that. Right. I mean, right.
Right. And so even the controllers are not trained on this, or they don't talk about it much. I went to a friend of mine as part of my research on this that spent his entire career in ATC, and he spent it not only as a controller, both tower and TRACON and center. So he had all 3, but he also was a specialist and still is in his retirement world, doing accident investigations, specifically how ATC interacted with the accident. So this guy's really, really sharp. And I reached out to him and he went, no. I said, what's the guidance in the 8900? He said, our best judgment. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to beat up one controller. You take a young controller out of school and how do they know what a Bell Jet Ranger weighs compared to a 76?
Yeah,
they don't have a clue.
They don't know. No
they
clue.
don't have a clue.
Right.
And 99% of your fixed wing pilots don't have a clue. And I would like to go around the show and say, what's the weight difference between those? And you'd have a lot of helicopter guys and gals that might not know. If they haven't flown that airframe, they just might not know.
It's unimportant to us. If you don't fly the ship,
why do I care?
Why do I care?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So to all of a sudden throw this burden out there becomes another animal as well. So yeah, the ATC folks are not well trained in it, and it's not their fault individually.
Correct. Well, we don't know what we don't know.
We don't know. Every industry has found something new. I mean, at one time, we didn't even talk about wake turbulence at all in our industry, at all.
And not that long ago, actually.
And it wasn't that long ago.
Or microbursts.
Or microburst, exactly.
What have you found other evidence of this occurring with fatalities, with respect to rotor wing and fixed wing encounters?
So here's what I found. I found 3 videos online. One of them is a departing 172 at an airfield in the UK, and he flies through the rotor. And let me back up a minute, Bruce, and talk about some terminology I think is very important. I'll give you FAA terminology, then I'm going to give you my own. So the FAA terminology is downwash, and they link that specifically in their terminology to hover. Then they talk about in forward flight rotor tip vortices, and they speak about that specifically as in forward flight. And in what I'm doing and in the education side, I think we need to simplify it. And I don't think that a guy flying a J3 Cub needs to know the difference. And so to me, it's caution helicopter wake turbulence, period. Mm-hmm. And whether it's at a hover or whether it's taking off or landing, I don't really care. I should hear that and stay away from it.
Correct.
It just doesn't matter.
Right.
The scientific terminology
it's indifferent to most helicopter pilots.
It really is. It really is. So the FAA has made a determination in their studies between downwash and rotorcraft vortices, specifically to forward flight. And they've specifically said in one research report, and that's above 40, which is well above ETL in almost every single rotor helicopter in the world. So we can just say, hey, if they're above ETL, let's just make it simple on ourselves. We've got some trailing vortices that we didn't have before, and if they're below ETL, they're not trailing, they're 360 degrees at 3 rotor disc diameters. Mm-hmm. Let's just keep it simple so we can all be safe. Mm-hmm. That's what we care about.
Right.
Right.
And 3 rotor discs is not insignificant, even on a small aircraft. That's if you've got a small helicopter, you've got a rotor disc in the 25 to 30 foot range.
Right. So a Robinson is about 75 feet.
Right.
Is its 3. Now here's what's really fascinating. I found a mathematical formula that takes into consideration a lot of things, rotor diameter and then converted to entire rotor disc area. And then you calculate in the aircraft weight, and then you have to calculate in slugs per foot. And I'm looking at you and you're going,
I don't know what a slug is.
well, I didn't either. And I can't tell you how many CFIs, and they've all scratched their head and they go, what's that? Well, it is a meteorological measurement. I can't explain it scientifically to you, but it is actually a very complex formula to get to it. So what I did was I used what the slug calculation is at a standard temperature at sea level. Instead of trying to convert it because the conversion itself of that is its own animal to try to convert. I had to get my daughter to help me with these because, again, I went to public school. And
I can only imagine.
She was like, Dad, what are you doing to me? It was pretty funny. But here's a number for you I want you to just chew on for a minute. If you take an S-76 at 10,000 pounds and you calculate all these things at no wind condition, at a hover, at 144 feet, according to the calculation, it is putting out, are you ready for this? 52 knot wind.
Wow.
At 144 feet.
Right, that's a half a football field. It's a half a football field. And let's give this some other aviation perspective. At most older constructed, uncontrolled little airports that are 3,000 foot runways with 75 foot wide runways, the distance, and this is on an average, I mean, you can go measure your own, the distance between the center point of the runway and the center point of the taxiway is 140 feet. Wow.
So I'm getting ready to take off, and there's a helicopter over there hovering, and I think I'm fine.
His rotor has an impact upon
He's going to have an impact at 52 knots. You wouldn't take off with a 52-knot crosswind, would you?
Right, especially one that's essentially almost like a mini microburst. In other words, there's no crosswind until you get to within that distance from the helicopter, and then suddenly you have an enormous crosswind.
A good friend of mine who is in full-time in the helicopter safety world, he says, Ned, we are moving microbursts.
Correct.
And I thought, wow, what a great way to describe it. As I said to one EAA chapter in my presentation, I said, gentlemen, it's a beautiful day out there. There's not a wind in it. They said, yep. And I said, you've got some gorgeous antique airplanes. You've got some home builts. You've got some tail draggers. If I told you a storm was coming with 52 knot winds, you would be flying around here like crazy trying to get those things secure. And they said, yes, we would. I said, but you'd think nothing if you heard a helicopter taxiing down the taxiway. And they went, you're right, we wouldn't. And I said, it could conceivably turn over every one of your airplanes, just sitting on the ramp.
Right.
Just forget about flying behind it. Let's not even go there yet.
Sure.
So it is just astounding, the amount of force that it puts out for the distance. And I want to be careful to say that I only gave you the distance. I didn't talk about the decay time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was hovering here this minute. How long does that last?
I have no idea.
So the decay
I'm sure
time...
it's more than a few seconds.
It is more than a few seconds. The decay time at a hover now is, as best as I could find, somewhere in the 2-minute range.
Wow.
That's a long time, Bruce.
That's a very long time.
It's a very long time. It's just astounding.
Right. Well, the helicopter, quite honestly, could be hovering there, make a departure from the ramp or from the taxiway.
It could.
It's gone.
It's gone.
And now, you were on the hold short, another aircraft was on the hold short line.
Right.
Was doing their mag checks, et cetera, before departure. The helicopter's gone because he took off or she took off perpendicular to the
Correct.
runway, let's say, the taxiway.
Yep.
And now you're faced with the vortice.
Well, and what's important to know is that downwash just is still there, and it now got converted to a trailing vortice that's much more like the wake turbulence of a heavy aircraft. So we've got two things going on. And the other thing I found is when fixed-wing pilots hear that a helicopter is at taxi, their brain goes to what they know as taxi, which is we're not in flight, we're not doing anything. I point out to my fixed-wing community, when we're at a hover, we're in full flight.
Correct.
We are in full
Absolutely.
flight.
Right.
The minute we lift up, we are in full flight. And it's amazing. You see their faces go, oh, yeah. I get it. They don't know. They don't know what they don't know. It's not their fault.
Right. The majority of aircraft, majority of helicopters are on skids. In this country anyway.
Exactly.
And so we're taxiing around in a hover.
And they think nothing. They don't think what we can do.
Right. Well, that's why we have big aircraft on wheels.
Exactly. So the 172 in the UK was taking off, full power, clean configuration, flaps up. They flew through the rotor wake turbulence, because it was now in forward flight, of a departing R-44. And the video is from a GoPro camera inside the cockpit.
Of the
172. And you don't even see the helicopter in the video. You can see out the windscreen of the 172, but you don't see out of it. And the gentleman flying the helicopter puts full left aileron in to the stops to keep that airplane upright. And then you can see the VSI very clearly as he takes off, typical 172 with two people in it, probably doing 400 foot per minute, a rate of ascent. His VSI goes to 0, and then it jumps to almost 1,000.
Wow.
It goes to 0, and then 1,000 up.
Up, right.
1,000 up.
Wow.
It's just astounding. And to me, the reason that's so astounding is the lightweight of the R-44, coupled with, and this is important, the 172 is in a clean configuration at full power. The other two videos I have that I found online are...
So that one didn't result in an accident.
It did not result in an accident.
Right. Was the 172 pilot aware or have any... Did he or she make the correlation between the helicopter
instantly?
and the...
But what's interesting is only after it happened. They said, oh, there goes the helicopter, and they took off. It would be like, there goes another 150, right? I mean, it's what? It's a couple 1,000-pound airplane.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know. I don't fly Robinsons, but I'm going to just make a guess out there that it's, 1,800 pounds gross weight or something like that for an R-44. 2,000 pounds, whatever it is. So we'd go, oh, there's another 172. And we wouldn't ever, and a 172 wouldn't make any wake turbulence that would upset another 172. We wouldn't even think about it. And this guy was like, and they mentioned it in the video, in the audio, you hear him and go, oh my gosh, that was from the, so they picked up on it immediately. The other two videos are interesting in that both of them are fixed wing and landing configuration. And both of them are landing behind a departing Black Hawk. So Black Hawks are 20,000, 25,000 pounds, whatever. The first one is an SR-20, a Cirrus, and some poor guy, and I think his second solo.
Wow.
He's landing. Now, you got to take this into account. He's got power all the way back and full flaps. But he got tangled up, and he literally cartwheeled down the runway, and it's on video. Luckily, got out of it with a broken wrist, destroyed aircraft, so he was injured, but no, he wasn't killed, thankfully. And then the other video that I share, and this one's also very disturbing to me, a departing Black Hawk, a landing PC-12, which I've looked up, is about a 9,500-pound turbine, big airframe. They're big. They're a big airplane.
Yes, common, very safe aircraft.
Very safe, yeah. Popular airplane. Gear down, flaps, power back. And I'm telling you what, how that pilot, gal or guy, I don't know, how that pilot salvaged that from not crashing, I don't know. But the inputs, I would guess that their bank to the left, probably more than 50 degrees. And it's almost instantaneous.
Amazing. On final.
On final.
Dirty, final.
Dirty, yep. And the two things I'll tell you is how did they get out of it? A lot of power with that PT-6 and those big blades, but also some pretty astute piloting on the part of the aviator. Both aircraft landed behind the departing Black Hawks under 1 minute.
Wow.
We could argue about, well, they were too close behind them. But again, this is not a topic any of us has ever had.
I don't think most people would consider landing near where a helicopter of that size even had taken off virtually 60 seconds ago, would give it a whole lot of thought.
Up until now, Bruce, I probably wouldn't have either. I have to be very honest with you. And this is something we need to just get the word out. We got to tell people, just stay the heck away.
Well, as you said earlier, it's a man-made moving microburst.
Right.
And when we think back, and I don't know the date, I should know the date, but it was a very famous accident here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where the aircraft was on final to DFW Airport and it encountered a microburst and it crashed with the loss of many, many lives.
Right.
That's what promulgated the research and the advancement of the understanding of the dangers of microbursts.
Correct.
and changed the way that the airline industry, the aviation in general, but primarily, we think about it with a large aircraft, but it changed the world. It changed our understanding.
It did.
And as we're talking, you imagine an aircraft using full control deflection to avoid a complete disaster or not avoiding the complete disaster in the Cirrus's case.
Right.
Or in the PC-12, the Pilatus case, it did avoid the event with, like you said, a whole lot of horsepower.
Right.
It seems startling. However, if we were discussing a microburst, we would be saying, well, sure.
Yeah,
of
exactly.
course.
Yeah, exactly. And I would even argue the thing that's fascinating is the microburst is coming straight down. The rotor wash is coming, but it's also swirling. So not only are we getting this downward movement of this air, but we've got this spinning air.
Rotor effect.
This rotor effect, this vortice effect that's out there. I found a pretty extensive FAA study that was done in 1996, and it's actually titled Rotorcraft Vortices in Forward Flight. So they made the distinction between downwash and vortices, so I didn't make that piece up. And they took 4 helicopters, UH-1, a 76, a Chinook, and a CH-53 as the target,
sure.
the aircraft that they used. They put smoke on them, and then they used a T-34 with a highly experienced aerobatic pilot, and they used a decathlon with a highly experienced aerobatic pilot. And Bruce, the results are stunning. They talk about in this report uncommanded 1-second bank angle rolls to 60 degrees.
Whoa!
At up to a mile trail from the 53.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a pretty high-performance aerobatic plane is rolling at maybe 3 degrees a second or something like that.
It's astounding. They talked about the decathlon actually getting into a condition that they termed wing flap. The wings actually started to flap in a harmonic flap.
Started to resonate.
In a harmonic way. They theorize in the report, I want to make sure that I'm clear about that, they're theorizing that it has to do with the harmonics of the vortices themselves. But it was violent enough that the pilot exited the maneuver and wouldn't do it again. He was afraid of catastrophic failure of the wing.
That says a lot.
That says a lot. It says a lot. And this was done in 96, and we're just now having the conversation.
More than 25 years ago.
More than 25 years ago.
More than 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So clearly this is something you're passionate about, something you're working hard on.
Right.
Where are we going with this? What are the next steps for you?
So I've put together a working group. You've been invited to it. HAI, Greg Brown from the education group is on it. We've got some folks from the aeromedical community on it. AOPA is on it. They've agreed. They said yes. Once I talked to them, they said, you're right, this is a message we need to get out. I've yet to reach out to EAA, but I'm in the process of that. So I want the alphabet groups and I want some industry groups to be on this. We have now uncovered these research reports, some from the UK we found, this one from the FAA. We're looking for more. And what we want to do is really 2 things, Bruce. We want to put together some training that is put out like AOPA Air Safety Foundation through the EAA's training, HAI's training, various groups. So we want to get some training out there and we're just going to own that. We're going to do that on our own. But we also want to reach out to the NTSB and the FAA and get them on board to say, we need to do more. We need to teach more. It needs to be in the AIM. It needs to be on ACs. We need to do more complete. I would like to see the conversation added in to the wake turbulence conversation in the ACS for all level of check rides. I talk to DPEs and they stand there with their mouths hanging open going, Ned, I've been at this my whole life and never even thought about it. And thank you. And some DPEs are now talking about the subject and they're adding in helicopters, not in a way to bust somebody because I've showed them what's written and they've gone, yeah, I can't bust anybody on that. There's hardly anything written on it. But they are having at least opening the conversation during their debrief when they're allowed to, and trying to just educate people one at a time. NAFI's involved through National Association of Flight Instructors. We want to get education out to them and to start to teach people about this. And frankly, if it takes 50 years for the FAA to get on board, I don't care. That doesn't mean we don't have to. That doesn't relieve us of the responsibility, just as
absolutely
aviation community-minded folks, to go out there and say, "Hey, folks, let's be careful about this."
And like a lot of things, the epiphany that you've had is when you describe it to people. I think most every aviator is going to nod their head in agreement. Their eyes are going to get a little larger, and they're going to say, "Well, of course. Why didn't I understand that or realize that? Why wasn't that something that was spoken about or written about in more detail?"
And what I did this morning, I presented this in a class this morning here at HAI, and what I said was, I said, we in the rotorcraft community, as we have done with our downwash conversations, and we've done with how to interact with us in a hover situation, we need to expand the conversation. We need to go out to the EAA groups, the different pilot groups, the pilot clubs that want speakers, want presenters, and want a new topic. And we need to say, hey, we want to have this conversation.
Right. This is a fresh topic that I would expect. I will be surprised if it isn't much more widely spoken about in 12 months than it has been in the previous 12 months.
Well,
and I think that'll
that certainly is my hope, for sure, that it becomes a topic of conversation. And that's to me the greatest place to start. I can tell you in the working group we have, and we've only been doing this since really November, so it's not even 6 months yet. One thing that we have said is we don't want to put out information that we've made up. We don't want to put out information that we think is right, even if it's well-intended. So if I tell you a 3-mile separation, it's because I read it out of research. And until I got my hands on this FAA research report that had been done in '96, we didn't know. We didn't know. We could guess, but it was merely a guess, and we didn't want to do that.
Right.
So now that we've got this report that was done, in a peer-reviewed way with, some really smart folks that know how to do that kind of research, I feel comfortable now saying, 3 miles in trail is probably where we need to be. The decay, they're measuring at the 100 and the chart shows 105 seconds. I'm saying 120 at a minimum, probably a little bit more. At 120 would be 2 minutes, right? So more than a minute and a half for sure. And then it is well established at the hover. We're very well established there at a 3-rotor disc diameter. We're well established there. I think the other thing that I would encourage pilots to do is at their home airports is go on Google Maps, and you can do measurement, and you can find out what's the distance between the center line of your runway and your taxiway. What's the distance between the ramp and here where maybe I land my helicopter. If you're an airport manager and you're trying to decide, where do I want to park helicopters on my ramp? This is a good way to try to say, hey, if I park them over there and I keep things clear up to this distance, we're good, right? We're in pretty good shape. And bring that awareness up to not only mitigate damage on the ground, but also tipping airplanes over. And
absolutely.
And Bruce, I just heard this story this morning from a gentleman from the UK that sat in my program this morning. Wait till you hear this story. Apparently, just last week, I think
I know right where you're going.
Just before he got on the airplane to fly here.
84-year-old woman?
There was an 84-year-old woman that was killed being tossed across the parking lot by just downwash, and another woman is still in the hospital.
Yeah, it was a landing medical helicopter.
A landing medical in the UK. He just told me this just less than an hour ago.
Yeah, I had seen that, and although I must admit, just like our conversation here, when you read that and you think an aircraft, a sizable aircraft, the aircraft was, in the 12,000-pound range. I don't know what its all-up weight was at the time. But you think about an aircraft like that shooting an approach into a helipad.
Right.
And, someone, for whatever reason, finding themselves underneath that downwash.
Right.
It really doesn't, it is shocking, it is horrible. But again, much like what you're telling me now, when I hear it, I think, wow, that's tragic, but I'm not shocked by it.
I'm not shocked. And I don't know where it happened, but there's signs up at helipads.
Sure.
We have parking, separations, but we can't control everything.
And sometimes those get ignored because we see so many warnings.
Right.
We warn people about any slip and fall hazard. We warn.
Right.
And so sometimes it's human nature to, if you're warned about everything, then what is important to heed?
What is important, yeah.
And it's tragic. When you were talking about, having good, solid empirical data, that the beauty of this is because you're starting at the very ground floor of this with respect to promoting and educating, is that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence or anecdotal knowledge that we have, that the industry has. It's possible to take that anecdotal evidence, do a little bit of research, make it empirical data, a fact, and then disseminate that.
Right.
And as you said, it's a research that was done 25, 27 years ago is a good place to start.
It's a great place to start. And I think that more research needs to be done. They had 15 findings or conclusions at the end of the report, and some of them I've shared. And one of the others was more research needs to be done. So part of the thing that we'd like to push for in the working group is, who can step forward with some money and get the right people and a grant to do more research. Take this and build on it, and give us something even more empirical that we can hang our hat on. Things that we know. We know if I land beyond where that 737 touchdown and I stay above it, I know I'm fine. Because the research has been done. I know that, right? And I'm guessing at a lot of the rest of this, and I just don't want to do that.
Well, and when we start incorporating, and it will happen sooner than we may imagine, when we start having UAM, urban air mobility, when we start incorporating those vertical lift vehicles into the National Airspace System. And so imagine that at any given vertiport, you may have a 5,000-pound UAM with 4 packs departing behind a Black Hawk that departed a minute earlier. So the timeliness of this, not just for traditional aircraft, fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft, but also the aircraft of the future, and that is vertical lift.
It is.
And what will imagine that you're somewhere and a V-22 is hovering nearby or departing, or it's hovering out of ground effect someplace, or it's transitioning, it's going from helicopter mode to airplane mode. I mean, what are the risks? And those are pretty significant. Those are heavy aircraft.
It's interesting. I'm working with a fellow right now that's got his fixed wing rating, and then he went and bought a beautiful restored Bell 47. I'm helping him get his private add-on. And we were taxiing back to his hangar, and there was a hangar door up. And I said, whoa, we can't go in front of that. And he goes, why not? We're just taxiing. Now,
because you're in full flight.
I said, well, you're in full flight, and your prop wash would be behind you. You would taxi by it. And he said, you're right. I said, you got it going 360 degrees. And he went, oh.
Right.
It doesn't matter how I'm pointed. I go, nope. I'm doing damage 360 degrees around me, buddy. So, put it down. And the guy that owned the hangar came out and waved us by.
Sure. Well, that is fascinating. If I land at an airport and I'm flying an R-22 at 1,370 pounds. I believe that's gross mass. It's been 35 years since I've flown one, but let's just imagine. I think I'm right. 1,370 is gross mass. I don't remember what I had for dinner, but I think that's the gross mass. So when I come to an FBO flying a Robinson, if there is someone to guide me or park me, they're going to park me out in the middle of nowhere, which is quite honestly where I'm going to park anyway.
If they're well-trained.
If they're well-trained. So it's interesting, though, I've pulled up to similar FBOs on the same day, flying a much larger helicopter, And because it looks snazzier,
Right.
oftentimes they'll want to park you up front where
Correct.
people see you. And of course, I park in the same place I would park the R22.
Yeah.
As far away
As I
from
can get. Right.
And I walk. 2 reasons. One is my downwash.
Yeah.
And the other is I can use the exercise. But truly, it's fascinating that the aircraft that need to be parked well away are all helicopters, in my opinion. Now, if you're on wheels and there's nothing, but even when you're on wheels, you're putting some downwash down.
You are.
But again, as you pointed out, Ned, I think we're pretty cognizant of that. And I believe, in fact, my experience has been that on an airport, most helicopter pilots that I've observed are fantastically appropriate and considerate of their fixed wing brethren.
They really are.
And I mean, I've been sitting on the ground before at an airport running up a ship, a fairly large ship, and I've had fixed wing aircraft pull up to the tie down spot, beam me.
Yep.
And stop, and I'm at flight idle, flat pitch on the ground, and there's now an airplane sitting.
Now what do I do?
75 feet away.
Correct.
And that's when I have to ask someone in the cockpit with me or in the back, would you please?
Right.
Or if there's a tower, I'll call ground and say, hey, ground, are you still talking to November, blah, 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 blah?
Right.
Would you please see if they wouldn't mind repositioning? But if I can't have any of those things occur, I sit there until either I can make eye contact, and if I can't, I just have to shut back down. Now, that's only happened a few times in my life where I've actually had to shut down. But I think we've probably all had the case where a fixed-wing aircraft or another person, maybe it's even ground personnel, are too close to the aircraft for me to be able to bring it to full flight, hover, and taxi out.
Yeah.
It's not malicious on their part.
No, not at all.
They don't know.
They don't know.
They don't know what
they don't know.
And I think, if you take that same example and then put it with a pilot on the hold short line at an airport in Akron, Ohio, and a 10,000-pound helicopter goes by.
They're gone now. I can take off.
Yeah.
And it cost him his life.
And
it's tragic.
It is tragic. So, yes, it is tragic.
Fortunately, back when I was flying a lot and I was doing some moving some airplanes or some helicopters, I got to the point where I would try to find airports and FBOs that had fuel trucks.
Absolutely.
So I could, it was easy for me to say, I'm going to go way over here and bring the full fuel truck to me because I didn't want to mess with it. I didn't have time. I was coming from picking up a brand new MD and bringing it across country, and I needed to get moving. I was trying to beat weather. I didn't have time to fool around and wait for airplanes to be moved and everybody gawking at it. I need to get my gas, go to the bathroom, pay for it, and leave.
Right.
So I would look for a place. Do you have a fuel truck? Yes. Okay. I'm gonna just understand. I want to park as far away. Oh, okay, great. I'd call them on the phone because I was like on a big hurry.
Absolutely.
And
I'm not one upping you, but maybe it sounds like I am. I'm
not.
No. I won't go to an airport without a fuel truck unless there is zero chance.
Right.
If there's no other option, I will.
Right.
But if there's another option, I will pay more to go to a field
100%.
with a fuel truck to bring the fuel to me.
Yep.
Because we've both had this experience as well, where you go get fuel, you land at the pump,
right,
and then you go in, you pay for your fuel, you come back out, and now there's a fixed wing parked
or 3
too close, right?
Trying to get his fuel,
right?
Yeah,
and now you have to wait. And it sounds maybe it sounds gauche to say, but if you are whether you're flying medical helicopter, whatever your job is that day,
right.
Typically we don't want to just sit on our hands while another ship is fueled. And I avoid hovering up to a pump. Yeah, almost gives me shivers.
Yeah, you and me both. And the Bell 47 that I fly is at an airport where we have to. And I've just taught the owner, I said, look, we're going to be very selective about when we go over there. And we're going to get there, we're going to get the fuel, and we're going to move it immediately.
And I've had cases, it's funny, I learned to fly in Hughes 300s a few years ago. And if I had wheels with me, I've actually had to put the wheels on the ship. Just a Hughes 300, that's 2,050 pounds.
Right.
Again, 2050 hovering.
It puts out
50, 60, 100 feet from a 172 is going to, at worst, do some significant damage.
Right.
At very best, in the best case, upset the owner.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
No one wants
their aircraft.
A microburst beating up their
airplane. Yeah, and then they get mad at us.
And I don't want to be, again, it's incumbent upon us to be we need to promote aviation safety, promote aviation education, friendliness, courtesy.
Right. Right.
And I think that when we exhibit that, when we show that consideration for people, it from the rotary wing aspect especially, it helps alleviate any bad taste someone may have or any misunderstanding someone may have about helicopters.
Right.
We were speaking the other day about making off-field, unanticipated landings, maybe because you're forced to land because of weather or what have you. And I have never had a negative experience with that. I've always had a positive experience, whether it be a farmer or a police officer that shows up or what have you. You explain why and what you did, and then quite honestly, whether it's the next hour or the next day when you depart, give them a helicopter ride. Take them, show them that you are a reasonable person, doing reasonable things. Educate them, show them, and it can only improve our industry.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Sometimes it's not through. We're not trying to be rude. We're not trying to be inconsiderate, but maybe we're not mindful. Correct. In other words, if you're at a fuel pump and you've made effort to find the person with the fixed wing, but you've got to go. You need to pick up your medical crew. Your medical crew is waiting for you. You've got another call,
right?
And you need to go. So you're gonna, pick her up to. You're not going to pick her up to a hover. You're going to get her light on the skids,
slide a little bit, do whatever you can do.
But the person that owns the airplane may see you doing that, and their plane's being jostled or violently banged around, and they think poorly of you.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So, sometimes you can't avoid things like that, but most often we can.
Most often you can. You can do something.
You can do something.
I've moved other people's airplanes without their permission because I couldn't find them.
Right.
I've had the line people do it. That guy doesn't like people handling his airplane. Well, he's going to like it a lot less when I take off, let me tell you.
Exactly. And, we can damage an aircraft with our downwash and not even know that we have damaged it, and the person may not know that we've damaged it, which is a whole nother conversation we'll have one day. But, you might put a rock and damage the windscreen.
You could do that on the low end, or you could stress out some flight controls.
Absolutely.
They can get battered about.
Absolutely. So so you're right. I think we understand that well when we discuss.
We do. I think the rotorcraft community does a really good job of understanding and trying to mitigate as best we possibly can the damage we can do on the ground. And we need to do more education of the fixed wing community of what can happen there and work with them. And then the whole forward flight thing is a whole new conversation for all of us. It's a whole new conversation for all of us. The ATC, FAA, NTSB, us, fixed wing, everybody. It's a whole new conversation.
Right. As we kind of wind up this episode, it would be my plea for people who either know me, know Ned, have an interest in this topic, have an interest in aviation safety in general, or would like to reach out to Ned for any reason.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell us how to get a hold of you, Ned?
Sure. So my email is ned@a360c.com. So alpha360charlie.com. And I have this program, and I keep refining it because we're still learning, right? And so I'm willing to do this, obviously on Zoom, at no cost to any pilots club anywhere in the country. All they have to do is call, and we'll get it figured out, and we'll get online, and I'll do it for the group. If I can get to them in person, I'll do that too. That's fine. But we want to get the word out, and we want people to know. So don't hesitate to call. Say we don't have a budget. Well, you don't need one. We'll just make it happen. We'll figure it out.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
That is, that's the hallmark of a safety advocate, the safety professional, and I have great respect for you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So we've reached our clearance limit.
And we still have our reserves.
We still have reserves because we're not foolish. We have no hair and gray hair. I would like to thank Ned for your time, your insight, your safety advocacy. It has been fantastic.
The information provided during this podcast, Push to Talk with Bruce Webb, is made available for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Airbus Helicopters, Inc. or its affiliates.